God created recently, there should be some scientific evidence of that, shouldn't there?
This week on Creation Magazine Live, scientific evidence for a recent creation. We're talking about scientific evidence for a young Earth, young universe, young animals, young planets, all kinds of things like that. It's important to note before we get started here that no dating method can prove the age of the Earth or the universe or rocks, either young or old, without making some assumptions. Assumptions go into every dating method, and nevertheless, we can look at some things. We'll start with some biological things that kind of make you scratch your head and think, okay, these are commonly understood to take millions of years, but that time scale doesn't work.
Right. So if you've got the millions of years of geological evolution, slow sedimentation over millions of years, that buildup of the sedimentary rock, or versus, let's say, the young Earth creationist model, what the Bible says that there was a global flood which would lay down layers very rapidly, and the creatures get buried and fossilized very quickly. There's two ways of explaining the same data. Let's see what we see in the fossil record. We're going to look at a picture of a shrimp. Now, the interesting thing is that on the left of the screen, you're going to see just a modern-day shrimp, a dead shrimp, and on the right-hand side, you see a fossilized shrimp, nearly identical to the shrimp on the left, except the one on the right-hand side is supposedly 150 million years old.
Something's up with that, right? Either no evolution took place, and that's not an option for the evolutionist, or that fossil was not produced 150 million years ago. Something's wrong with the time scale in that case.
They can invoke evolutionary stasis. Well, evolution means change, right? And stasis means no change, so it's a silly phrase. But if mutations have been occurring for 150 million years in any kind of creature, it should have no similarity to a modern creature.
Yes, and there's dozens of examples of animals that have been, they're called living fossils.
Right.
Ants, horseshoe crabs, jellyfish, bats, the Wallamai pine tree, and there's actually hundreds more where it's like this shrimp, where you have something that looks, something living and something that's identical in the fossil record.
Like the coelacanth, for example. This was once used as an index fossil. They said, well, wherever you find a coelacanth in the rock layers, the thing's 60 million years old. And then they found a live one off the coast of Madagascar. You can go swimming with them today. So they say, well, how similar is the coelacanth to its supposedly 60 million year old predecessor? It's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same skeleton. It hasn't changed at all.
Something's wrong with the time scale there.
Right.
It makes much more sense that coelacanths were living recently and no evolution is happening.
Right.
Something else we could look at, dinosaur bones are young. You can see here some fresh dinosaur bones. There's blood vessels and blood cells inside a Tyrannosaurus rex leg bone.
How can it last for 70 million years?
That doesn't make any sense.
Well, this, by the way, was criticized. I've heard this criticism from evolutionists. That's not really soft tissue in a dinosaur. It's biofilm. You know when you get a bucket and you leave it outside for a while and it's got that scum around it? You know, that bacteria scum? That's what evolutionist Mary Schweitzer was criticized. And now she went looking for more of this, by the way, and she's found it. She took, Jack Horner, I think that was the fellow's name, famous dinosaur hunter. They found more. She says you can sequence the amino acids in the collagen she found from this other dinosaur. They've found soft tissue in dinosaurs several times now.
Yes.
That's totally
They're finding real soft tissue and blood vessels and blood cells and so on. They're all there. There's other things that we can point to. For example, DNA extracted from bacteria that are supposedly 425 million years old brings into question that age.
Lazarus bacteria. You can bring them back to life after 425 million years. Why can you do that?
Again, it suggests that the time scale there may not be accurate. How can it last for 425 million years?
How about just the information in the human genome, right? It becomes more mutated with each generation. Well, if it's mutating at such a high level now, over 100 mutations per generation,
right?
How could it possibly have been doing that for the last 3 million years?
Since we evolved from apes, and before that it was other creatures, so we can't really stop there.
That's why you've got population geneticists who are evolutionists writing papers now called "Why Aren't We Dead 3 Times Over?"
or 100 times over.
100 times over.
And we did a whole show on this 2 weeks ago. You can go back if you recorded it. You're lucky, but there's other things that we can point to as well. Mitochondrial DNA is a part of the DNA that's passed on only through women.
Right.
The entire world's population has the same mitochondrial DNA, which means the entire population goes back to one woman. If you look at the mutation rates in mitochondrial DNA, those rates, you can get sort of a date from when all that came back together, and you get back to around the time after the flood.
Right.
All of the world's population goes back within that time frame to a single woman. Interesting how much evidence supports the young Earth.
It's often claimed that evolution is simply change over time, and since change over time can be seen everywhere, then evolution is obviously true. But highly qualified creation scientists say there is much more to it than that. For evolution to have turned particles into people, simple change over time is not enough. A special kind of change is needed. That is, naturally occurring change that adds new genetic instructions. No one has seen this special kind of change happen. Darwin's finches, peppered moths and adapting bacteria are all examples of naturally occurring change, but not one of them shows the addition of new genetic instructions. Not one of them writes any brand new genetic code specifying how to make some new complex feature, such as feathers for lizards, for example. And since codes and programs cannot write themselves, there must have been a designer for all living things.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
We're just flying through some evidences that support the Bible's timescale for a recent creation, God creating in 6 days. Look up creation.com/age, and there's an article there that lists 101 evidences for a young universe and a young age for the earth, young age for creation.
Right.
And we're just going to continue just throwing out some of these evidences. You can get the details on creation.com. Here's another one, tightly bent strata. I took this picture here when I was in the Grand Canyon. Look at how tightly that strata is bent at that location there. It's not broken, it's bent.
How could it bend if it was really that old, right? If the rock had hardened completely.
Right. Hard rocks can bend under certain circumstances, but if you look at the grains in there, they haven't been elongated. Right. There's no indication that those rocks were bent.
Reheated and then bent
That's
again.
Right. That's right.
Coal formation. People have been taught that coal takes a long time to form.
Supposed to be millions of years old.
But in experiments that simulate natural forces, coal can form quickly. In weeks for brown coal to months for black coal. So it doesn't take millions of years. We've got observable evidence simulating what they would figure what the natural forces would have been to produce it. And long time periods actually could actually hinder the formation of coal because there's more time for the wood to have permineralized, etc. So it's actually more easily understood that the coal formed quickly rather than for a long time period because the wood could have hardened. So to speak.
Yes, the same thing can happen with oil. Oil can be produced very quickly. Doesn't take millions of years.
Right. Have they done they've done experiments and shown that, right? It happens very quickly.
Yep.
And opals as well. People think, well, these gems, they must have taken a long time to form. But again, we've got experimental science showing that can happen in a matter of weeks. People can grow them in jars and such in a matter of weeks.
That's right.
Maybe those big prices you're paying for opals, maybe
I don't know. Yeah, what that would do to the opal market in Australia where they're so popular.
Yeah.
Instant petrified wood. That was a heading in Popular Science in October 1992, a number of years ago. At Advanced Ceramic Labs in Seattle, researchers made wood ceramic composites that are 20 to 120% harder than regular wood, but they still look like wood.
Right.
So it's stone, it's petrified wood that this company is making commercially. There's a certain number of chemicals and so on, and they have this mixture, and they can petrify the wood for like hardwood floors or making furniture.
Right.
That's way more durable than regular wood. But again, the ingredient that's necessary to petrify wood is not time. Time isn't necessary.
Right. I mean, we've got examples of wood becoming petrified naturally, where you've got fence posts, the wires still through it, screw holes in it, all these types of things, axe marks still visible. So it was obviously recent, and it's completely petrified.
It doesn't take millions of years. Erosion at Niagara Falls. I mean, that's been a big evidence apparently for millions of years. I don't know how they come up with that, but the gorge, the Niagara Gorge, as the falls eat away the cliff and eat the gorge upriver, you can do a calculation. How long would it take for the falls to get to their current location? It fits in very nicely with going back to the time of the flood, especially considering that there was an ice age after the flood. Creationists certainly accept that there was an ice age. Lots of evidence for that. And that would have resulted in increased flows through this area, very likely, at the end of the ice age as the glaciers melt back.
And evolutionist Charles Lyell actually tried to use Niagara Falls as proof that the Genesis account was wrong, but he lied, actually.
And yes, yeah.
Okay, how about underfit streams? You know, you see these large river channels, but the river or the stream is quite small,
little river.
But it's got this big thing. And so what calculations actually suggest is that the streams would have had to be 20 to 60 times their current discharge. The volume of water that would have had to create that, because you can't have this one little stream. There's no way for it to carve that out.
Producing a huge valley, yeah.
Right. So that means, well, if there was that much water there in the past, then all that erosion, that would have taken place quickly.
Right.
Not slowly. So the Grand Canyon, for example, it wasn't a little bit of water over millions of years. It was probably a lot of water over a very short period of time.
Yes,
things like
which
that.
fits in with the Bible very nicely.
Yeah.
The amount of salt in the oceans, even if you were to adjust all of the measured rates today of salt input and how the salt is escaping and so on, for maximum age, you can only get to about 62 million years.
So if you started with no salt content, and then you use today's rates.
But that doesn't fit with evolution at all.
There's
3 billion another problem with the time scale looking at that particular dating method. And we'll be back with more in a few minutes.
Genesis Verse by Verse is a Bible study tool available on CMI's website, designed to help pastors, students, and laymen alike study the book of Genesis like never before. And it's completely free. Simply look up any verse in Genesis 1 to 11, or just scroll down the page. The center column provides links to articles that answer common questions pertaining to that verse and the topics that naturally arise from them. Visit creation.com to use it today.
Okay, let's get back to some evidences for a young Earth or a young universe, and let's go to astronomy. How about the recession of the moon from the Earth? Tidal friction causes the moon to recede from the Earth at about 4 centimeters per year.
That's right.
That's what we're observing. And the moon and the Earth, you'd have to be touching. When you think about it, you just extrapolate backwards. If that's been going on for that long, the evolutionary timescale just doesn't work.
And they would get so close inside the Roche limit, it's called.
Right.
And the gravity of the Earth would tear the moon apart. So, and that it doesn't fit the 4.6.
It couldn't have been receding for
that length of time.
For that length of time.
That's right. Another thing, ghost craters. Thinking about the moon, if we look at the moon here, the moon is heavily cratered, and we see in some of the larger craters. For example, here, this is the Mare Crisium, and there are ghost craters. You can see them there near the bottom of the screen, some kind of faint craters. And what's happened there is, there's a close-up of it, that arrow there pointing to a crater. So these massive areas, mare, were thought to be seas originally, the dark areas. And what happened was that's a massive impact that actually caused lava to come up and fill in the crater.
Right.
But there were other craters, there were other impacts happening during that time as the lava was filling up, and they've been partially filled. That's what you're seeing here in this picture, right. A partially filled crater. But those impacts could have only happened while that lava was still flowing.
Right.
Which means that all of the impacts, which are commonly understood to take a long period of time to get all the moon is heavily cratered, right. But very likely those craters happened, those impacts happened in a very short period of time with these ghost craters. That's the idea behind that.
Volcanically active moons on Jupiter are consistent with youthfulness. Galileo mission recorded 80 active volcanoes. If these had been erupting for 4.5 billion years at even 10% of its current rate, it would have erupted its entire mass 40 times.
Yeah, little
in
Io
that amount
here.
of time. Yeah.
All these things are supposed to be old, cold, and dead. 80 active volcanoes, it just doesn't make sense. There's another problem with this millions of year scenario for the evolutionists. If we think of the magnetic fields of some of the planets, very, very distant, Uranus and Neptune, for example, have magnetic fields.
Right.
They shouldn't. Again, they should be old, cold, and dead.
The existence of short period comets with the orbital period less than 200 years. So, for example, Halley is consistent with an age of the solar system of less than 10,000 years. So you've got these comets, they're whipping around, and they're going to be losing mass
with every orbit.
With every orbit.
Yes.
So over time, they just shouldn't be there anymore. If this had been going on for millions of years, you shouldn't have these. As a matter of fact, evolutionists have come up with this idea of the Kuiper belt. Is that
the Kuiper belt, and the Oort cloud, and so on?
Yeah, the Oort cloud. So there's supposedly this cloud out there that's spitting out these comets. The only problem is nobody's ever observed it.
Yes, the observations are rather scarce on that one.
So we don't have data to support our theory. That's a good argument against it. So what we're going to do is we're going to invent this ad hoc theory for something that no one has ever observed to explain the data away.
Right.
So to speak.
Here's a picture of a supernova, what you're looking at here, a picture from NASA again. Supernovas are the remnants, the leftover kind of guts of a star after it's exploded. We can make some predictions. How many supernova remnants, SNRs, in the column on the left there, should we see if our galaxy, looking at the Milky Way galaxy, is billions of years old? First stage, second stage, third stage. The third stage are the very oldest, very largest supernova remnants. There should be about 5,000. That's the prediction. But if our galaxy is on the order of 6,000 to 7,000 years old, look at the predictions. They're vastly different. We should not be seeing any third stage supernova remnants.
Right.
So here's the data. If we go to the astronomers now
Right.
and ask them, okay, what are you seeing in your telescopes? Look at that. The Milky Way is not billions of years old.
Right.
It doesn't work. And there's so many other evidences from astronomy and from biology, and we'll get into some of these just after the break. But God created recently.
One of the basic tenets of science is that open-mindedness is critically important, and the evidence should be followed wherever it may lead. But some scientists say that we should not always be so open-minded, and that some conclusions should not be allowed, even if demanded by all the evidence. They say that no matter how much evidence there is for ingenious design in life, in the structure of the universe, or in libraries full of encoded information in genomes, they must not even consider the possibility that God might have had anything to do with the creation of such wonders. One scientist said, "Even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic." But this simply reveals a philosophical bias against God. Many highly qualified scientists believe the Bible's account of creation provides a much better explanation for the existence and operation of the universe.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Now we're talking about scientific evidence for a young Earth. Often one of the scientific dating methods that's brought up to try to support an old Earth is radioisotope dating.
Right.
You find rocks and they have a particular something radioactive in them and decays over time into something stable. You measure those two amounts, the radioactive parent, the stable daughter product, and you calculate an age.
Right. There's
actually good evidence from that particular field that argues for a young creation.
For example, carbon-14. It's only supposed to last, because of its decay rate, maybe 100,000 years.
It's very radioactive, yeah. It shouldn't last that long.
So anything that's supposedly older than 100,000 years that still has C14 in it, there's something wrong. Either your millions of years date is wrong, or else C14 isn't. But we can measure its decay rate. You can find carbon-14 in coal. Well, coal is commonly taught to be millions and millions of years old.
Right.
But if it still retains carbon-14, then it can't be millions
that old.
of years old. One of your dating methods doesn't work. Fossilized wood, diamonds, they find C14 in diamonds. Well, diamonds.
Diamonds are a real head scratcher, because
Yes.
the hardest natural substance known to man.
Very hard to think that it had been infiltrated,
Contaminated in some way,
from
yes.
any outside source. So
Yep.
how can it possibly? It should have dissipated.
There's a powerful argument that diamonds didn't form millions of years ago. They formed more recently than that.
That's right.
There's another evidence from radioisotope dating of rocks and so on. You have deep in the earth in granites, you have these little crystals called zircon crystals. And these have been observed to have radioactive elements in them, uranium and so on, that decay over time. Now, whenever something decays radioactively, helium is a byproduct of this process. So we can use this as a dating method. If there's a certain amount of decay in these little zircon crystals inside the granite, we should be able to see the helium. If If that decay happened quickly, the helium should all still be there. Helium's a slippery little sucker that works its way through the matrix of the rock.
It's not going to stay there for a long time.
It's not going to stay there. These creationists years ago in the RATE program by ICR, they dated a number of these. They looked at the radioisotope decay and saw that the equivalent of 1.5 billion years of radioactive decay had happened. You can measure the amounts. That's how much it happened.
If it had been constant, it would have been 1.5 billion years.
Yes, but if that's true, all of the helium produced over that immense period of time would have worked its way out through the rock. But the helium was all still there, either in the zircon crystal or just outside of it in the surrounding granite.
Right.
Which means that decay has been accelerated. That amount of decay, the equivalent of 1.5 billion years worth of decay, happened rapidly, happened recently.
So when people are making assumptions, well, we can see the decay rate today, it's always been that way. Well, that's not necessarily true. You're only making observations of what you can see today. For example, I know recently they've been saying that solar flares from the sun may be affecting isotope decay here on Earth. There was a report I heard very recently about that. So, the jury's still out on that, but many scientists are just flabbergasted. So you just don't know. And that's why we're telling Christians, if you're hanging your hat on one certain scientific method that seems to indicate this or that, boy, best to go with what the Bible says than somebody's theory.
Right.
How about human population growth? You've got less than 0.5% per year growth from 6 people 4,500 years ago. That'd produce today's population.
Yeah.
The current growth rate's about 1.7% per year. I mean, if the population had been growing for 3 million years since we evolved to become humans or whatever like that.
Where are all the people?
How
come we only have 7 billion people on the Earth? There should be way, way more than that.
That's right.
But yeah, using very reasonable estimates.
Yeah.
You think about the Stone Age. The Stone Age was supposed to be, 100,000 years long, and people during that time apparently buried their dead with artifacts and so on.
Right.
If it was really that long, we should be up to our necks in grave sites all around the world. But the Stone Age could not possibly have lasted that long.
That's right.
Thinking about human population. But there's a lot of scientific evidence for a young Earth, human population, and the things we've gone through very, very quickly already.
Right.
We've only summarized these things, kind of given the conclusions.
Encourage you to go to that article on our website.
That's right.
Creation.com/age, and you can just go through argument after argument after argument that supports what the Bible actually says about the age of the Earth.
Refuting Evolution is a powerful, concise summary that explains where the common evidences used to promote evolution in textbooks are wrong, while at the same time showing how creation is better supported by scientific observations. It will stimulate much discussion and help students and teachers think more critically about the creation-evolution debate, particularly the often overlooked differences between operational and historical science and how they relate to the topic of origins. Order your copy today at creation.com.
Okay, well, welcome to the feedback section. We often get feedback on our website from either videos that we've done or articles that we've posted. And we had an article where we were talking to a chaplain, and he was a theistic evolutionist. And so he'd written in, and we'd posted some responses, and we received a lot of overwhelmingly positive correspondence from people about how we had this dialogue with them and stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, we received an overwhelmingly positive response to our exchange with the compromising chaplain, Rodney M. See Part 1 and Part 2, and you can see this. Go to the website, creation.com. Does creation make the gospel a laughing stock? And then you can read the original dialogue back and forth if you'd like. But Robert S. from Australia criticized our responses. His message is printed in its entirety, followed by a response by Gary Bates and Lita Costner. I'm going to not read all of his response, but I'll just kind of set it up and you'll see where he's going. He said, I agree with the chaplain. Creationists are unnecessarily destabilizing the faith of young Christians, unjustifiably attacking science and the many Christian scientists who think differently from them, making the gospel, the Christian faith, and the church a laughing stock in schools and universities and alienating students genuinely interested in the Christian faith. So he's basically just saying that, creationists, people who take the Bible as plainly written, who believe God created as His Word says,
yes, Yeah.
We're just doing a disservice to Christians and to the church, and people are
Yeah.
just laughing at us because we don't believe in science.
Yeah, we do believe in science. If there's anything that creation.com shows, I mean, we've got scientists on staff. In fact, as far as we know, of all the Christian groups around the world, we employ the most PhD scientists.
Right.
We're not anti-science. And many of our scientists were former evolutionists.
Right.
They know the other side of the story.
Yep.
Here's what Gary and Lita, here's how they responded. With all due respect, we don't see how you could hold that view after reading the overwhelmingly supportive comments by Christians that have been published below. Both responses to Reverend M. At the time of writing, yours is the only negative response. All of the aforementioned respondents were saying that they were excited when they found out that the Bible can actually be trusted from the very first verse. Although you claim our view is a stumbling block, this seems to be a self-born perception that is not grounded with much experience if the testimonies are anything to go by. Many commented on how creation teaching actually opened their eyes to the truth of the gospel and led to them becoming Christians.
Right.
I think one thing, a comment that we could make here is, I think that the first thing that new Christians, or one of the first things that new Christians should be given is a copy of our Creation Answers book.
Right.
Or a subscription to Creation Magazine or something,
Yeah.
or go to the website, read some articles there to get a handle on the relationship between biblical truth and scientific observation.
Right.
How do we understand those two things properly?
Right. Because we can answer the scientific questions.
Yes.
Versus, evolution, millions of years. We have a way of explaining all that. That's not a problem. But again, this person seems to have fallen into this trap of, listen, if we don't accept what mainstream science is teaching, people will consider us a laughing stock. And then let's face it, we get feedback a lot of times, and sometimes you get feedback that's not phrased very nicely, so to speak. You guys are morons.
Yes.
You guys are idiots. Why don't you guys pack up and go home? You use
And
flat
worse than that.
earthers and all sorts of stuff. But he's kind of buy into that. He's saying, well, see, that's why these people treat you like this, because you're not accepting real science. You're
Right.
not. Folks, dead people don't come back to life according to science.
No.
Virgins
don't conceive.
They don't
People
conceive.
don't walk on water.
Yeah.
And on and on and on.
They use the same words.
Yeah.
If you believe that some gal got pregnant, without there being any human donor, you're a moron to a lot of these people. That's the way that they talk. So it's not just in one area of the Bible. People don't respect you more because you believe in evolution in millions of years, but you still believe that the dead guy came back to life.
Yes, yeah. And there's a word that's been floating around that is kind of, it's contextualization. Contextualization.
Right.
And so this fellow seems to be advocating the notion that what we really ought to do is since the world doesn't believe that God created recently, let's downplay that aspect of of truth,
Right.
And we'll just kind of ignore that aspect of truth. It's kind of the Apostle Paul in Acts 17 when he went to talk to the Epicureans and the Stoics who didn't believe that physical people could rise from the dead.
Right.
He attacked their false beliefs. He didn't downplay that part of the gospel. He showed them where their beliefs were wrong and challenged them to accept a risen Christ. And that's what we need to do as well. Show people the truth of what the Bible says.